In the last lecture, I was pointing out that it was significant that samurais in Japan only unified twice to fight foreigners, and before that, they're fighting amongst themselves. And so, at this time, we're seeing that Europe is disintegrating, but Japan is trying. There's leaders in Japan attempting to unify. And so you have Oda Nobunaga. He unites central Japan in the 16th century and pioneers the use of firearms. And I think I mentioned this in the last lecture, that many people in the West don't think of samurai during this time having firearms. And in order to stabilize the country, Hideyoshi instigated the Great Sword Hunt in 1588 and finished the job of unifying Japan. Now, this Great Sword Hunt is interesting because, and it was actually, I believe that even guns, swords and guns were not allowed to be, basically, it was disarming the population. It's one of those great fears that you hear about now and the gun debates taking place in America. But I think that one should be careful to draw too much of a parallel. Yes, there was an attempt to create centralized power, and one could argue that the taking away of weapons from the people was a way to consolidate power in some sort of totalitarian or despotic way. On the other hand, we should look at this time period that there was the chaos of that there were that these different warlords were fighting amongst themselves, and this would also create more peace and stability. So anyhow, I just thought I would bring that up in context to that, and so we look at sometimes things in the past and we look at what's going on in the future, and there's certain things that are similar and they're worth looking into, and on the other hand there's some differences as well. So, and here's some pictures of samurai with guns. Again, not something that a lot of people think about envisioning. So that's just kind of going briefly over the unification of Japan. Now, I have to talk about Korea, Mongols, and China because you can't really isolate the discussion of East Asia and bring up Korea or China or Japan and not bring up one or the other. In the 13th century, Koreans were conquered by Mongols. Keep in mind that the Mongols conquer everybody. The Mongols are conquering the Islamic world. They're conquering in parts of the West and the Far East. But China eventually ousted the Mongols in 1368. And there's a new Korean regime that restores connections with China, okay, the Joseon dynasty. All I really want you to get from this section is to keep in mind the interrelationship that exists between China and Korea, and then further I'm going to also bring up Japan in this, and it helps kind of explain things that you see in the modern context as well. So Hideyoshi, as we talked about earlier, it seems like there always goes when you unify, then you got to kind of find a common enemy, or he brings them all together and then they go invade Korea. Korea would not let Japan pass really to invade China, so Japan is ready to burst out into the scene and attack its neighbors. China sent 500,000 soldiers. Japan still overran Korea, but China was never conquered, and Korea remained autonomous for three more centuries. And Koreans were able to hold their own, and they had their own kind of ingenuity, such as this turtle ship. There's a replica. Now, in that case, we're seeing Japan as an aggressor, but that's not always the relationship between Japan, China, and Korea. And at the same moment, and we'll look at this when we go into World War I and World War II, that these three well, in the case of Japan, there's still a certain bitterness felt by many Koreans and Japanese, and Chinese towards Japan to this day about things that happened in World War II. And while maybe even some now see this, there's an inherent conflict between China, Korea, and Japan. I'd argue if you look at the history, it fluctuated. Okay. And so what I want to do is I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to go over Tokugawa rule. Oops.